Hello besties, welcome back to Maggie Stories. What would you do if you accidentally body slammed the most handsome man?
The rain came down like it had a personal grudge. Not the polite kind of soul rain that gave you a 5-minute warning. The kind that darkened the sky slowly, that made the leaves curl inward like they were embarrassed for you. No, this was the ambush kind. The kind that went from zero to biblical in the space of 30 seconds, and Vashti Abina Osamensa was caught completely, humiliatingly, in the middle of it. She'd made it approximately 42 steps from the gate of her residential complex before the sky just opened. Like God had been holding a bucket all day and finally got tired. "You are kidding me?" she said out loud to no one. She looked down at herself. She was wearing the cream linen wide-leg trousers she'd finished tailoring at 2 in the morning. Hand-stitched hem, raw edge detail she'd spent 40 minutes perfecting, and a soft caramel knit top tucked in just so. Her slides were the tan Bottega ones she'd been saving for a dry weather moment. Her Ghanaian gold cuff bracelet, the one her grandmother had pressed into her palm at the airport in Accra before her first flight out of the country, sat heavy and beautiful on her wrist. All of it was about to be ruined. "Run," her brain said, and her body agreed immediately. Vashti broke into a sprint with the kind of urgency that bypassed dignity entirely. Her slides were slapping against the wet pavement in the most embarrassing rhythm. Her natural hair, an elaborate twisted updo she'd done herself that morning, fat sections pinned and stacked with gold thread running through them, was being actively assaulted by the rain, each drop an attack on 2 hours of morning labor. The estate where she lived was one of those quietly expensive compounds in Mapogu, leafy, maintained, tucked away from the main drag of Seoul's chaos. The kind of place where the sidewalks were wide and the trees were old and the air smelled different at night. She'd chosen it specifically because it had a jogging path that curled around a small man-made pond, flat enough for easy runs but with enough greenery that you forgot you were in a city of 10 million people. She loved it. She ran it 3 or 4 times a week after work, earphones in, playlist at a volume her mother would call irresponsible. Tonight she had not made it to the jogging path. Tonight she was just running. She turned a corner at speed. The bend that curved around the big ginkgo tree that had no business being that old and beautiful in the middle of a housing complex. And she didn't see him. She could not have seen him. He was just there. Tall. Solid. Standing under the overhang of the complex's covered walkway. Apparently unbothered by the storm. Jacket folded over one arm. Phone in his hand. Looking at something on the screen with the calm of a man who had never once been surprised by weather in his life. Vashti hit him like a freight train. Not a gentle bump. Not a cute romantic comedy shoulder collision. Full. Body. Contact. Her 5'7" frame slammed into him and the momentum of her sprint did the rest. She bounced off his chest and her slides, useless on the wet tile of the covered walkway, slid out from under her and she went down. She landed on him, which somehow was worse, because he tried to catch her, reflexes clearly worked, and his hand caught her arm but not quite enough and they both went sideways against the wall, her back against his chest, his shoulder hitting the brick, and for one absolutely mortifying second they were just entangled. His arm around her waist, her hand gripping his shirt, rain thundering 3 feet away. A silence between them that lasted exactly as long as it took Vashti's brain to reboot from the impact and process what had just happened. She stepped back immediately, almost tripped again. Did not trip, she had some dignity left, approximately 4%, and she was using all of it. She turned around. He was tall, properly tall, the kind that registered. Even when she was flustered, with dark hair that the humidity had pushed slightly out of place, a jaw that looked carved, and dark eyes that were doing the thing she hated most, the thing she'd feared from the moment she'd seen him. He was trying not to smile. The corners of his mouth were doing everything they could to stay still and absolutely failing. He was laughing at her, internally, which was somehow worse than out loud. Vashti felt something hot crawl up the back of her neck. It was embarrassment. It was very much embarrassment. She was drenched. Her linen trousers, the hand-stitched hem, the beautiful hand-stitched hem, were soaked through. Her updo had released one full section on the left side, and it was hanging against her cheek in a dramatic spiral. Her gold cuff was fine, the gold cuff was always fine, but she was not fine. She had 2 options. Option 1, apologize. Be normal. Be the kind, sweet, gracious Vashti that her mother raised. Say, "I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" Brush herself off, go home. lie face down on her floor and process the embarrassment privately. Option 2. You're just standing there, she said flatly, in the middle of a walkway, in the rain. He blinked. It's covered. It's a corner. She gestured at the ginkgo tree, as if it could testify on her behalf. Who stands on a corner? In the rain? With no warning. I was waiting for the rain to slow down. You didn't think to, I don't know, stand somewhere visible? The corner of his mouth lost the fight. He smiled. A real one. Not mocking, not polite, but genuinely, helplessly amused. Like she was the funniest thing that had happened to him in recent memory and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. I'm sorry, he said, and she could hear the laughter threaded through it. I didn't realize I needed a visibility vest to stand in my own residential complex. She opened her mouth. He added, very calmly, Are you okay? And something about the way he said it, direct, no pity. Just a genuine question. Knocked the argument clean out of her. Yes, she said after a beat. You're sure? Because you hit the wall fairly hard. You hit the wall. I was redirected by you. He laughed then. Actually laughed. This warm, easy sound that he clearly wasn't trying to control. And something happened in Vashti's chest that she absolutely refused to acknowledge. Something that felt inconveniently like the ice around her ribs cracking. Just slightly. She looked at him standing there, dry jacket over his arm, completely unbothered, laughing in the rain sound, and she thought, without meaning to, he reminds me of the drain pipe, which made no sense, and also made total sense. When Vashti was 7 years old in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a block 2 miles from uptown where the houses had porches and the neighbors knew your name, there was a drain pipe on the side of her grandmother's house that sang when it rained. The water would hit it at the top and rush through, and it made this full, satisfying sound, like the rain was happy to have somewhere to go. She used to sit on the porch steps in her grandmother's 2 big rain boots and just listen. The rain scared her a little, the thunder did anyway, but the drain pipe made it feel manageable. Musical. Like the storm was just another kind of song. She hadn't thought about that drain pipe in years. She hadn't thought about what it felt like to love the rain in years. She looked down at her cream linen trousers, thoroughly ruined. She looked at the rain, still going hard on the other side of the walkway's overhang. She looked at her slides, soaked and probably never the same again. And then Vashti Abina Osamensa did something that surprised even herself. She laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one. The kind that came from the stomach. The kind her Charlotte grandmother said was the family's best inheritance. She laughed and she stepped back out into the rain, tilting her face up to it. Because the linen was already ruined and the slides were already ruined, and something about this man laughing with her, not at her, even though it had started as at, reminded her that she used to love this. She used to stand in storms on purpose. What are you doing? He called over the rain. Ruining my outfit on purpose, she called back. Takes the pressure off. There was a pause. Then the sound of footsteps. He came and stood beside her, jacket still in hand, because he was apparently also a little crazy, and he tilted his head back and looked up at the Seoul sky pelting them both, and said nothing for a moment. Then, I'm Seo Junwoo. Vashti, she said. Is that West African? She looked at him sideways, rain running down both their faces. Ghanaian. Fanti. You know Ghana. I know the flag, he said, which was somehow both a terrible and a perfectly acceptable answer. That's a start, she said. They stood in the rain for another 40 seconds before sense prevailed, and they both retreated back under the overhang, drenched and breathless, and something else Vashti wasn't naming yet. He said goodnight first, politely, naturally, like they hadn't just met in the most unhinged way possible. She watched him walk toward the B building, 2 buildings over from hers, and she stood there dripping on the tile thinking one singular thing. I live in the same complex as that man. She went home, hung her trousers to dry even though the hem had separated in 2 places, made herself jollof rice the Charlotte way, with a spoonful of tomato paste her mother shipped her every 2 months, and sat on her floor and ate it and did not think about him. She thought about him the entire time. He had a name. He lived 2 buildings over. He laughed like the rain had somewhere good to go. And Vashti, who had not allowed herself to be anything but carefully, deliberately unbothered since she'd arrived in Seoul 2 years ago, lay in bed that night. listening to the rain slow down outside her window, and felt, for the first time in a long time, like something was beginning. She closed her eyes. She was still annoyed about the trousers, but only about 60% annoyed, which, for Vashti Abina Osamensa, was practically a love letter. 3 days passed. Vashti did not see him. She told herself she was not looking. She told herself that every time she took the longer route from the parking structure to her building, the one that looped past the B building entrance, it was because she liked the ginkgo tree. The tree was old and beautiful and deserved to be appreciated. It had nothing to do with anyone. She told herself this 4 times in 3 days and believed it less each time. Work was a mercy. Work was always a mercy. Vashti's studio was in Seongsadong, in a converted warehouse space that she'd spent 3 months and an embarrassing amount of money turning into exactly the right kind of beautiful. The walls were raw concrete on one side, warm plaster on the other. The cutting tables were custom. She'd drawn the specifications herself, the exact height her back needed after a 6-hour stand, the exact depth for her largest pattern pieces. Fabric samples hung on a long horizontal rod the length of one wall, arranged not by color but by feeling. The ones that needed confidence on the left, the ones that needed tenderness on the right, the ones still deciding in the middle. Her label was called Abina, her middle name, her grandmother's name, a Ghanaian name given to girls born on Tuesday, and it had spent 2 years quietly becoming the kind of thing that fashion people in Seoul discussed in the same breath as legacy houses. Not loudly, not yet, but the right people knew. That was how Vashti had always operated. Let the work speak first, let it speak clearly, and the noise would follow on its own schedule. She was a Fanti specifically, from a family that had spent generations on the coast of Ghana before her parents made their way to Charlotte in the late 80s. Her father for graduate school, her mother for love, and then for a life they built together on a street with a drain pipe that sang. Vashti had grown up between 2 worlds without ever feeling like she fully belonged to either, which her therapist back in Charlotte had called a source of tension and which Vashti had eventually decided was actually a superpower. She designed for women who existed in the space between cultures, between expectations, between who they were told to be and who they were becoming. That was the whole language of Abina. It was good work. She was proud of it. And it kept her busy enough that she had absolutely no time to think about Seo Junwoo. Except for the times she thought about Seo Junwoo. The 4th day, she went jogging. The weather had turned gentle. That particular Seoul early evening light that came gold and low through the gaps in the buildings. The kind of light that made even concrete look like it had feelings. Vashti was in her running set, lavender with white piping, earphones in, playlist at the irresponsible volume her mother would disapprove of. 3 songs in when she rounded the curve by the pond and nearly ran into him again. She stopped herself this time. Barely. He was jogging too, coming from the opposite direction, slowing as he registered her. And for one suspended moment they just looked at each other. Him in a plain black running shirt and shorts, sweat at his hairline, breathing slightly elevated. Her in lavender, earphones still in one ear, the other dangling. He smiled first. That same one, the real one, unguarded like he couldn't help it. No rain today, he said. Pity, she said. I had a second outfit I was willing to sacrifice. He laughed. She felt it in her sternum and refused to acknowledge that. They fell into step beside each other without either of them deciding to, which was the most dangerous kind of thing, the things that happened without a decision. They did one full loop of the pond path, and Vashti learned the following. Seo Junwoo was 33 years old. He was an architect. He had been living in the B building for 14 months, which meant they had been neighbors for 14 months, and had never once seen each other, which she found both statistically unlikely and somehow cosmically appropriate. He was from Busan originally. He had moved to Seoul for a firm and stayed because Seoul had a way of doing that to people. What kind of architecture? She asked. Residential, mostly. Some cultural spaces. I just finished a community library in Yunpyeong-gu. That's the one with the curved wood ceiling? He looked at her sideways, something flickering in his expression. You've been. I went for a pop-up textile exhibition last spring. She paused. I spent 20 minutes lying on a bench just looking at that ceiling. Something shifted in his face. Something quiet and pleased that he tried to contain and didn't quite manage. That ceiling took 9 months, he said after a moment. Most of that time arguing with the structural engineer about whether the curve was load-bearing. Was it? Technically, no. Spiritually, absolutely. Vashti laughed. A real one, quick and bright, and she felt him register it the same way she'd registered his earlier. That sternum thing. Mutual and unspoken and absolutely not being addressed. They reached the point where the path split, her building to the left, his to the right. They stopped. There was a beat of silence. The gold light was doing something genuinely unfair to his face, and Vashti kept her eyes on the middle distance like a responsible adult. I should, she started. Can I? He said at the same time. They both stopped. You first, he said. I was just going to say I should get back. She nodded toward her building. Early morning, right? He nodded, looked at the path, looked back at her, opened his mouth once, closed it and said, Can I have your number? I'd like to. We could run together sometime. If you want. We could run together sometime. If you want. Vashti had heard smoother. She had heard so much smoother. She had been approached by men with the confidence of small gods. And the lines to match. She had also been approached by men with confidence but no substance, which was worse. Seo Junwoo stood in front of her with his slightly sweaty running shirt and his earnest fumbling sentence and his architect's hands and the memory of him laughing in the rain. And Vashti looked at him for a long moment. Sure, she said, and gave him her number. She walked back to her building telling herself it was just for running. It was a neighborly exchange. She was a social person, she had many contacts in her phone, this was simply one more. She checked her phone 17 times before she got to her floor. Nothing yet. She showered, made tea, sat on her window bench, her favorite place in the apartment, the one that looked out over the compound's trees, and opened her sketchbook. She was working on the next Abina collection. The theme was harmattan, that West African dry season wind that carried dust across the continent, that coated everything in a fine gold haze and made the air smell ancient. She wanted to translate it into fabric, the particular color of harmattan light, which was not quite gold and not quite gray but something in between. The weight of air before it changes. Her phone buzzed. This is Junwoo, the architect who owes you an apology for the corner incident. She stared at it. She did not smile. She waited 4 minutes and then typed back. The statute of limitations on corner apologies is 72 hours. You've missed the window. 3 dots immediately. Then, is there an appeals process? She put her phone face down on the window bench, looked at her sketchbook, the harmattan sketch, the color between gold and gray. She picked up her phone. I'll consider written submissions. 2 buildings over, Seo Junwoo was making a fool of himself in a way he hadn't done since university, and his younger sister knew it before he said a single word. Seo Yujin was 29, worked in UX design, and had the particular skill of an only daughter and youngest sibling. She could read her brother's face across a video call with the accuracy of a medical instrument. She called him every Sunday, which was the deal they'd made when he moved from Busan to Seoul, and she'd made him promise not to disappear into work the way their father had. He always picked up. She always noticed everything. This Sunday he picked up mid-smile. Yujin froze with her ramen halfway to her mouth. What happened to your face? She said. What? You're doing the thing. The thing where you're happy and you think you're hiding it. I'm not doing anything. Appa. She set her ramen down. Her eyes narrowed with the focus of a woman who had grown up studying her brother the way scientists study weather systems. Not because she could control it, but because she needed to predict it. Who is she? I don't know what you're talking about. You're smiling at your own phone. I was reading something. You don't read things that make you smile like that. You read architecture things that make you look constipated with concentration. She pointed at him through the screen. There is a person. Who is she and what's her name and why haven't you said anything? Junwoo put his phone down on the table, so she was looking at his ceiling and she heard him say, Her name is Vashti. Yujin's ramen remained untouched for the next 40 minutes. She extracted it all. She was gifted at extraction, patient, strategic, asking the questions that opened doors rather than the ones that made people shut down. She learned about the rain. She learned about the corner. She learned about the linen trousers and the cold roasting and the laughing in the rain and the jog and the stumbling number exchange. By the end of it, she had assessed the situation completely. You like her, she said. I barely know her. You went jogging on the specific route you knew she ran. Silence. Junwoo Appa. You planned the route. The route goes around the pond. It's the most logical. You planned it. Yujin was grinning now with the full unhinged energy of a sister who had waited years for this moment. You, Seo Junwoo, who has not voluntarily mentioned a woman to me in 14 months, planned a jogging route and then fumbled the ask so badly that you actually said we could run together sometime if you want. Another silence. That's not exactly. Is that not what you said? The longest silence yet. It was a reasonable suggestion, he said finally. Yujin collapsed against her couch cushion with the theatrical devastation of someone watching their favorite team lose a final. Appa. She pressed her hand over her eyes. You asked a fashion designer who you described as moving like she invented the concept of walking, to run with you. As a date. As your pitch. It wasn't meant to be a date pitch. Then what was it? It was, he stopped. I don't know. I panicked. Why did you panic? He didn't answer right away. Yujin had learned over the years that the pauses were where the real things lived with her brother. He processed slowly and spoke only when he was sure, which made him a very good architect and a very frustrating person to have a feelings conversation with. She's. He trailed off. Tried again. She doesn't make it easy. Not in a bad way. She's not cold, exactly. She's just. She has this quality where you feel like she's evaluating whether you're worth her time. Not arrogantly. Just honestly. Like she's done the math before on people who weren't, and she's not interested in making the same mistake again. Yujin was quiet for a moment. Then, more gently, you're scared she'll say no. I'm scared I'll be the wrong answer to a question she's asking, he said. Yujin sat up. She looked at her brother's face on the screen. The architecture of it, the careful, steady, serious person she'd known her whole life who had loved once with everything he had and come out of it hollowed in a way she was still watching. Him fill back in piece by careful piece. Then be the right answer, she said. Don't hint. Don't run as a date. Don't manage the risk by pretending you're not asking what you're asking. She pointed at him again. She sounds like a woman who respects directness. So be direct. Ask her properly. And if she says no? Then she says no and you survive it like an adult and you learn something. Yujin picked up her ramen. But Appa, the woman stood in the rain with you. On purpose. After you crashed her into a wall. She raised an eyebrow. I think you're overthinking your odds. He said nothing. Also, Yujin added, mouth already full. If you don't ask her out properly, I will come to Seoul and do it for you, and it will be so embarrassing for everyone involved. You wouldn't. Try me. He texted Vashti 3 days later. Not about running. There's a restaurant in Bukshan I've been meaning to try. They do a tasting menu, it changes every 2 weeks. Would you want to go? As an actual dinner. Not a running adjacent thing. Vashti read it sitting in her studio. Pins in her hair. A length of pale gold linen pinned to the dress form in front of her. The Harmattan collection. The color between gold and gray. She read it twice. She thought about what her best friend Tamara, back in Charlotte, would say. Tamara would say, stop playing, you know you want to go. She thought about what she herself had said to no one in her apartment approximately 37 times in the past 2 weeks, which was some version of don't rush, don't assume, you've been here before and it cost you. She'd been with someone before Seoul. A relationship she'd believed in completely and that had quietly, thoroughly dismantled her trust in her own instincts. She'd come to Korea partly to build her label and partly to put an ocean between herself and the version of herself that had stayed too long in something that wasn't right. She'd built a careful life here, controlled, beautiful, hers. She'd also been eating dinner alone for 2 years. She looked at the gold linen on the dress form. She thought about the drain pipe. She typed back, what time? And then, because she was Vashti and she couldn't help herself. And if the tasting menu is disappointing, I'm holding you architecturally responsible. His response came in under a minute. Fair. I'll have my structural defense ready. She put her phone in her apron pocket and went back to her pins. She was smiling at the dress form. The dress form did not comment on this, which she appreciated. The restaurant was called Esarian Soryun, tucked into a narrow Hanok lane in Bukshan that Vashti would never have found on her own. The kind of place with no sign visible from the street, just a wooden gate and a paper lantern and the faint smell of something braised and extraordinary coming from the other side of the wall. Junwoo was already outside when she arrived. which she noted without letting on that she noted it. He'd arrived early. He was standing with the particular stillness of someone who was trying not to look like they'd been waiting, which meant he'd definitely been waiting. Vashti had dressed with the focused intention of someone who understood that clothes were communication. She wore a dress from her own archive, one she'd made 18 months ago and never sold. A piece she'd kept because it was too personal to release yet. It was the color of dark cacao. Silk satin with a structured bodice and a skirt that moved like it had its own agenda. Gold thread detail at the neckline, running in a pattern her grandmother would recognize as Fanti-Kent geometry, abstracted, modernized, but unmistakably from somewhere. Her grandmother's gold cuff on her wrist. Low-heeled strappy sandals. Her hair up and elaborate, gold pins catching the lantern light. She looked like herself. Completely, intentionally, unapologetically herself. She watched Junwoo see her and she watched him not have a response ready, which was more satisfying than any compliment he could have produced. "You're on time," he said, which was clearly not what he'd planned to say. "I'm always on time," she said. "Ghanaians invented time. I'm fairly sure that's disputed." "By who?" "Historians, generally. I'll fight every single one of them." She walked past him toward the gate. "Are we going in, or are we doing a seminar on chronology out here?" He laughed, that warm, unguarded sound, and opened the gate. The inside of Soryun was the kind of beautiful that didn't announce itself. Low ceilings, warm light, tables that had clearly been made by someone who cared about wood grain. The kitchen was partially open, and from where they sat Vashti could see the chef, a small, precise woman in her 50s, moving with the economy of someone who had made the same movements 10,000 times and still found them interesting. The menu arrived handwritten. 12 courses. Junwoo had made a reservation 3 weeks ago, which he did not mention and she figured out anyway. The food was extraordinary. Not in a loud way, in the way of things that had been thought about for a long time. A clear broth that tasted like the sea and the mountains simultaneously. A small plate of slow-braised short rib with fermented plum that arrived at exactly the right temperature. Vashti ate with the focused attention she gave to things she respected, which Junwoo seemed to understand instinctively, because he gave her space to experience each course before talking, which was one of the most unexpectedly considerate things anyone had done for her in recent memory. By the 4th course she'd decided he was good company. By the 6th she'd decided he was exceptional company. By the 8th she was in mild trouble and she knew it. They talked about everything with the specific ease of two people who were both privately surprised by how easy it was. He asked about Abina genuinely with the kind of questions that told her he'd looked it up not to impress her but because he actually wanted to understand, and she found herself explaining it the way she only explained it to people she trusted. Not the elevator pitch version, not the press-friendly version, but the true version. "The first collection was about inheritance," she said. "Not wealth. The things that get passed down that don't have a price. My grandmother's cuff. The way my mother folded fabric. The fancy patterns I grew up seeing on walls and in church and on my aunties, and that I couldn't find anywhere in fashion that looked the way they actually looked. Not flattened for consumption, but alive." She paused. "I wanted to make clothes that carried memory, not as costume, as architecture." He was quiet for a moment. "Architecture," he repeated. "You're going to make that about you." "I was just going to say that's exactly how I think about buildings. Not as containers, as things that hold time." He turned his water glass slowly. "The library, the curved ceiling. I wanted people to walk in and feel that the building had been waiting for them. That it remembered something." Vashti looked at him across the small table. The lantern light, the sound of the kitchen, his hands on the table, the kind of hands that drew things. "Where did that come from for you?" she asked. "The caring about it that much." He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "My grandfather built houses, literally by hand in Busan after the war. Small houses, nothing grand. But he treated everyone like it mattered, completely used to watch him and think. He's not building walls, he's building the place where someone will hear their child laugh for the first time." He paused. It sounds exactly right," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. They stayed there for a moment too long to be accidental and not long enough to have to address it, and then the 9th course arrived and they let it save them. They were on the 11th course, a small perfect pear sorbet, when Vashti said it. She hadn't planned to. It arrived the way true things sometimes did, through the side door while you were paying attention to something else. I was with someone for 4 years, she said. Before I moved here. Junwoo stilled. Not with surprise, with the careful attention of someone who understood that certain sentences needed room around them. He was from Charlotte too. We built things together. An apartment. A routine. Plans. She turned her spoon over. He was also, the whole time, very carefully keeping me from advancing in the way I needed to. Not aggressively. Quietly. The way you can make someone feel grateful for the space they have so they don't think to want more. She looked up. I didn't see it for a long time. When I did, I felt so stupid that I almost didn't leave. Because leaving meant admitting I'd missed it. Leaving took more courage than staying, Junwoo said quietly. That's what my therapist said. Your therapist is right. She usually is. It's annoying. Vashti set her spoon down. I came to Seoul because I needed to be somewhere no one knew me. Somewhere I could build a Bina without anyone's narrative about what it should be. I told myself the no-dating thing was professional discipline. She tilted her head slightly. Turns out it was just fear in a more organized outfit. Junwoo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I was engaged. Vashti looked at him. 3 years ago. She was someone I met through work. Interior designer, we collaborated on a project and then just kept choosing each other. He turned his water glass again. She'd noticed it was a habit. Something he did when he was ordering his thoughts, the same way she reached for her sketchbook. We were together for 2 years, engaged for 8 months. And then she told me that she had spent the last year trying to love me the way I loved her and couldn't. And she thought the kindest thing was to say so before we went further. That must have destroyed me, he said simply. Not dramatically, just as a fact. Not because she was cruel, she wasn't. She was honest. But there's a particular kind of grief in realizing that you were fully in something that someone else was quietly leaving. And then wondering what was wrong with you that they couldn't stay. Nothing was wrong with you, Vashti said. I know that now. He looked up. I didn't for a long time. The lantern light sat between them. The sound of the kitchen winding down now, the meal almost through. Vashti understood something in that moment that she'd only understood once before in her life. Sitting on porch steps in 2 big rain boots listening to the drain pipe. That some things you recognized before you could name them. Before you had the vocabulary. You just felt the shape of them and understood. She picked up her pear sorbet spoon. For what it's worth, she said carefully. She was wrong to leave. Junwoo smiled slowly. You don't know that. You just met me. I know you designed a ceiling that made a stranger lie on a bench for 20 minutes just to keep looking at it, she said. I know you stood in the rain because it was funny. I know you asked me to dinner and actually called it an actual dinner. She raised an eyebrow. I'm making an educated assessment. He laughed. She ate her sorbet. The 12th course came and went and they stayed at the table long after it was finished, the chef moving around them quietly like they were part of the space, which maybe they were becoming. They walked back through Buckshin afterward. The lane lit gold and blue. The old Hannock rooflines against the Seoul night sky. They weren't holding hands. They were walking close enough that the backs of their hands brushed twice and neither of them moved away. They talked about his grandfather's houses in Busan. About her grandmother's compound in Cape Coast. The one she'd visited every summer as a child, where the walls were painted white and the bougainvillea came over the top and the smell of the sea was constant and the women in the family gathered in the kitchen every evening to talk. About Charlotte and Busan and the particular loneliness of cities that aren't yours yet. About the moment a city becomes yours. Vashti said Seoul had become hers on a Tuesday morning in February when she'd walked out of the Seongsu studio after an all-nighter and the light was doing something extraordinary over the Han River and she'd thought this is mine. Junwoo said Busan had never stopped being his even from a distance, the way some places stayed in your chest. Do you miss it? She asked. Every autumn, he said. There's a festival. My family goes every year. I've missed the last 2. He paused. You should see Busan in autumn. It was not quite an invitation. It was the shape of one. Vashti did not say yes and did not say no and filed it somewhere warm. After the dinner there was a second run, a third, a Saturday morning where they both ended up at the same Seongsu cafe by something that was probably not coincidence and neither of them investigated too closely. There was the afternoon he came to her studio because she'd mentioned she was stuck on the Harmattan collection, and he'd sat across from her cutting table and looked at the fabric samples on the wall. Really looked with the architect's eye and said, "The color you're looking for isn't on this wall yet. It's the light right before the dust comes. The moment before the wind, not the wind itself." Vashti had stared at him. Then she turned to her fabric samples and found a piece of undyed raw silk she'd been ignoring for months. A piece that was neither gold nor gray but the held breath between them. And she pinned it to the center of the wall, and it was exactly right. "How did you?" she started. "You described Harmattan to me for 20 minutes last Thursday," he said, already looking at his own phone, already at work on something. "I just listened." She looked at the silk. She looked at him. She said nothing. She went back to work. But she moved the cutting table 3 inches closer to where he was sitting, and he didn't mention it, and they worked in the same space for 2 more hours in a silence that was one of the best conversations she'd ever had. He kissed her on the 43rd day. Not that she was counting. She was absolutely counting. It was at the pond. Evening again, the light doing its gold thing, the ginkgo tree casting long shadows across the path. They'd stopped at the split in the path where they always said goodnight, and the goodbye was taking longer than usual in the way goodbyes had been taking longer for the past 3 weeks, stretching at the seams. He turned to her and said, with full eye contact and the directness his sister had instructed, "I'd like to kiss you, if that's all right." Vashti looked at him for a long moment. "I was wondering when you'd get there," she said. Eugen said the same thing. "I like Eugen. You've never met her. I already like her." He kissed her the way people kiss when they've been thinking about it for a while and they're not in a rush now that it's finally happening. Gentle and certain at the same time. Her hand found the front of his jacket. His found the side of her face. The ginkgo tree witnessed it without comment. Eugen came to Seoul 6 weeks later and Vashti made her jollof rice, the Charlotte version with the tomato paste and the scotch bonnet and the bay leaf, and Eugen ate 2 bowls and declared it the best thing that had happened to the family since the library ceiling. "You're exactly what I imagined," Eugen told her, picking up the 3rd spoonful. "Is that good or bad?" "It's perfect." Eugen looked at her brother, who was washing dishes in Vashti's kitchen with the comfort of someone who had keys. "He designed you a kitchen shelf." Vashti turned. "What?" "The custom shelf. Above your cutting table. He drew the plans 3 weeks ago." Eugen was grinning. "He said you were always reaching up for the wrong angle." Vashti looked at Junwoo. Junwoo looked at his dishes. "It's a structural improvement," he said. "Ergonomically justified." "He measured your reach span," Eugen added helpfully. "Without telling you." "I observed it," he said with great dignity. "Architects observe." "He is so embarrassing." They became what Seoul noticed slowly and then all at once. The fashion community noticed first, because of course they did. Vashti in her Abina pieces and Junwoo in his quiet, precise way of dressing. The 2 of them at openings and dinners and the kind of cultural events that Seoul did better than anywhere. Their particular energy of 2 people who were genuinely interested in each other's worlds. She went to a site visit, put on flat boots and a hard hat and walked the skeleton of a building he was working on in Yongsan and understood for the first time what he meant when he said he was building memory. The steel and concrete were just the language. The actual thing being said was something else entirely. He came to her first major Abina showcase that autumn, the Harmattan collection, finally finished, the undyed raw silk at the center of everything, that held breath color between gold and gray. He sat in the front row and she caught his eye once during the show, just once, right when the piece came out, the one built around her grandmother's Kent geometry, the one she'd been too afraid to make for years, and his expression was the same one he'd had that first night at Soryun. Not a performance of admiration, just the real thing. She had to look away before she ruined her composure entirely. They taught each other in the way only people who are genuinely curious about each other do. She taught him to eat jollof rice the Charlotte way and then the Accra way and made him understand the political weight of the distinction. He taught her to make doenjang jjigae from his mother's recipe, standing in her kitchen on a Sunday, the kind of patient instruction that was also a kind of love language. She taught him chui, not fluently, but the important things. Medos for thank you, Odo for love, Wahoti-san for how are you. He taught her to read buildings the way he read them, to see the intention behind the material, to understand why a doorway was placed where it was, why a window faced that direction. She taught him that black joy was its own architecture. built deliberately, maintained actively, not a reaction to hardship but a structure raised alongside it and sometimes in spite of it. He taught her that Korean Han, that particular cultural feeling of sorrow and longing and perseverance braided together, was not so different from what she'd carried across the Atlantic in her grandmother's gold cuff. 2 coastlines, 2 inheritances, 1 kitchen table where the jollof rice and the banchan sat side by side and neither asked to be explained. In December, 3 days before she was meant to fly to Charlotte for Christmas, her first time home in 14 months, Vashti sat on her window bench with her sketchbook and her tea and watched the compound go still in the early winter evening. The ginkgo tree had shed everything. The pond was dark and glass still. Her phone lit up. "Are you at the window?" She looked up. 2 buildings over. 4th floor. A light was on. A figure at the window. She typed back, "Are you looking at my building? Architects observe." She laughed out loud. Alone in her apartment, the kind of laugh that surprised you and then settled into something warm. "Merry early Christmas," she typed. "Feliz Navidad," he sent back, which was wrong, and she told him that multiple times. She suspected he was doing it on purpose. "That's Spanish. I'm branching out. Metas means thank you. I know. You've taught me. Then use it correctly." A pause. Then, "Metas, Vashti, for everything this year." She held her phone and looked out at his lit window and felt the weight and rightness of it again. That foundation being laid feeling. Solid. Earned. Nothing like the desperate grip of someone holding on too tight. Everything like the confidence of something built to last. She typed, "Odo." She watched the light in his window for a moment. Then she turned back to her sketchbook, to the next collection, to the blank white page waiting. She picked up her pen. She began.
Hello besties, in this story we learned that sometimes healing looks like crossing an ocean, building something beautiful, and minding your business so hard that love has no choice but to find you. The right person won't ask you to shrink. They'll find your missing color, build you a shelf, and laugh with you in the rain. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe, and share.